Sales is changing. We all know that, like buying is changing. They were not dialing as much, right? The phone got really, really hard. All of this is like having a PhD level intern.
This is on the cheapest possible it's ever going to get.
One seller like burned through all of his credits in a week, and too scripted, too perfect. And she was like, and it felt like AI slop in the flesh.
Now people don't buy tools, they invest in outcomes.
I really think there's like almost like a pivot back to the phone.
People want to buy from people.
What am I doing right now? I'm dialing. Welcome to episode 6. We basically rebranded. We did like 30 episodes last year, but we kind of rebranded to be more like SEO focused B2B content show. So welcome to episode 6 of the B2B content show. We got a sales badass, sales legend in the house. We got John Eitel, current CRO of Orum, former CRO of Demandbase, incredible sales career. We were also a VP of Canva back in the day. Saw them grow from, I forget the exact numbers, but you were there when they basically blew up.
Yep. Yeah. But it was a fun time to be there.
Yeah. Austin local, 20 years in Austin. So he's really seen the tech and sales community go from not much to being in the spot. So thanks for coming in, John. Appreciate you stopping by.
Yeah, no, excited to spend time with you and get to see the HQ here.
Yeah. So maybe we'll just kick it off quickly. Just maybe just like 2 minutes, 1 minute, just like who you are, what you're all about, and what brings you to your current day here at CRO of Orum.
No, I'll give you the quickest version I can, but started my career at the height of the .com bubble. Didn't know it was a bubble at the time, but came out of school and rushed into it and got there to see the bubble burst and collapse shortly after. And it was actually fun and in a lot of ways crazy and reminiscent of the times we're going through right now, obviously, but got to cut my teeth and try my hand at an early stage startup called Rackspace. At the time they were like 50 employees, and they were moving up market, trying new things, growing rapidly. And so really found out immediately like this is where I have the most fun, this is where I have the biggest impact. Stayed with them for 13 years, saw them grow from a team with a dream to over 7,000 global, publicly traded. Did a lot of different things during that time. And it was really fun. I think that 13-year journey, showed me like where do I have the most impact, where do I have the most fun, and it was helping companies, go through transitions and making these different decisions as you scale. So that's largely what I've been doing ever since. And so I, kind of fashioned myself as an expert at helping companies grow up. How do you navigate like the awkward adolescence phase? And so, coming out of there, went to a company called WP Engine here locally, which is kind of the same thing where it was, roughly about 50 million when I joined. 4 years later, we were 400 million in revenues. Got a call from the founders at Canva when they, 2 young founders in Australia wanted to move into the US. So, helped them bring their B2B vision to life. So launched the Canva for Enterprise product, opened up their Austin hub here on the east side. Nice. So neighbors from you all down the road here, and, stayed with them for about 3 years. Saw, I think just insane parabolic growth as they, were kind of, bringing this new tool to market to this new audience and buyer. Did some time at Demandbase, which we share in common there.
That's right.
Really, got to help them go through some of these kind of trials and tribulations and stages of growth. And then, now at Orum, which, kind of really fits, that's same journey of like, company that's got this great momentum in the market, doing something different, but, hitting, those, stages and phases of growth. And so how do I help them, make the right decisions, get through them quickly, and really kind of grow up to be the full-fledged company that they want to be.
What's kind of been the through line of where sales was kind of maybe when you're at the Canvas stage, and how you're thinking about B2B sales breaking into accounts then versus where we are right now with Orum?
Yeah. Look, and that's something that I really enjoy about like where I get to sit. But I would say, sales is changing. We all know that, like buying is changing. I think all these different things are, happening. And so, my early stage career was kind of more like enterprise SaaS selling, and then I, went to WP Engine, which was like enterprise-y plus some PLG, going to Canva. Canva was all PLG. Like they got to 250 million without any salespeople. And
crazy.
So the fun part about that was like, okay, you've got this great momentum in the market. Now, if you add a sales team and a marketing focus around this and a B2B, product offering, can you cross over from consumer to enterprise? Can you add sales and PLG together? Can those two things coexist? Like there's sometimes this belief that you have to be one or the other. And I think, for certain brands, you can be both. And so being able to figure that piece out. And, I'd say like, demand based again, I think was a good one around like, how are signals, coming into this? How is, buying getting more intelligent? How do you, use your sellers more effectively and embrace those signals? And, I think Orum, just again encapsulated a lot of these different changes we're seeing, putting together, cool aspects of AI. I think the things that we do with Orum that are really exciting, are all things that needed to be solved. Like I feel like the big problems that we're solving have always been challenges in sales. And you needed AI to be able to bring the pieces together to actually solve them in the right way. And so, making the phone, an important part of everybody's kind of like sales prospecting mix, reinforcing it with AI coaching. So being able to understand how your reps are performing, what are the words they're using, and the positioning they're using, and how is it resonating with that audience. The ability to connect teams that are now distributed and not in office. Like how do you build culture, in a distributed format? So I think like, it has been fun to see all these changes, move with it, be a part of some of the solution, to what all these teams out there need, and, taking, full advantage of the technology while embracing, I think the thing that's most important, like at the end of the day, it's still, I think, true that people want to buy from people. Humans have an important part in this. Ooh. And so I think that's the wrestling that we're all doing right now, or the balance that we're trying to strike here.
Yeah, for sure. I love the breakdown of your traditional enterprise SaaS seat-based model, PLG, and I think now certain companies in the industry, like there's a trend towards like headless or usage-based pricing. Like based on your experience going through these different like pricing models, how do you think a usage-based or a headless pricing model will impact B2B sales in the future?
Yeah, it's a big one that's on everybody's mind right now. And look, we're wrestling with it at Orum, I would say, because we are probably more seat-based at this point. And I think there's all these questions of like, could we go to usage? And I think that, usage is like the utopia that everybody would love to have, right? Like I want to just pay for what I consume, and, I'd feel a lot better about that. But I do think, for us right now, actually, where we've landed on it is, probably doesn't make sense to just totally change our business on a dime. Like our buyers are still very used to it, in this way. But we are bringing new products to market that have heavy AI components that, usage really also aligns not only for the buyer, but it also, aligns for the provider of like, if you have somebody who's like using a whole lot of that service, like you probably can't charge them the same as everybody, right? And vice versa. So it does bring us all together and align us. And so I think where we've landed is, as we bring some of these other products to market, we'll probably do a seat-based, plus like a hybrid model, and weave in, kind of the best of both worlds so that we don't completely confuse our buyers. Because I think that would be a big one for us, like retraining our sales team to go sell on usage, retraining our buyers to understand like that it is better. Because I think there is some skepticism of like, sure, I'll pay for what I, use, but I've never used this before. So how do I know what I need to budget? know? And so, I think the hybrid motion, at least for us at this moment, makes the most sense. And, we'll continue to evaluate it. I think like there's going to be, more and more disruption around this. People are going to, pioneer new things. And I think you just, have to be thinking about like, where does it, meet your buyers where they're at, and your evolution, how do you match those things?
What's the easiest way to break in to your target accounts in 2026?
Yeah, look, that's a good question.
It's kind of a loaded question.
I know, it's a loaded question. And I think it has a lot of variation, right, for everybody. I do think there's so much noise out there. Like I think one of the things that we've all seen is, with the proliferation of AI, you can create so much content, really quickly. You can create collateral really quickly. And that's great, but it's also bad, right? There's just so much out there, and so there's a lot of noise. And so I think like the biggest, answer I could give on that is like finding ways to break through the noise and be different, is the way to stand out. And so I think, that's one thing I would call out. I really do love, like part of the reason I went to Orum too, like my origin story on this was when I was at Demand Base, I had seen like our SDR team was getting less and less effective. We talked to, hundreds and hundreds of brands, had SDR teams that were getting less and less effective. And so, I started to, kind of pinpoint what are the common themes for all of them. And, some of them were that they went distributed, right? And so you kind of lost a lot of that shared learning and like knowledge transfer and osmosis that happens on a sales floor when people are together. But I also saw that they were not dialing as much, right? The phone got really, really hard, when the pandemic hit. Everybody went distributed. So there was no longer, a desk with a phone on it. It was, people working in coffee shops, working in, home offices. And so, everybody was struggling to find good data. They were trying to, find those buyers. And so they just stopped doing it. And so, I was having this like crisis of confidence moment of like, that can't happen. I just feel like it's such an important part of the mix. And, I met our CEO, Jason Dorfman, at a conference, and he similarly was at Rubrik. He was building out their sales motion. He was buying a bunch of technology and hiring a bunch of people. And he was like, the tool that I was looking for was Orum, and it didn't exist in the market. And that was what made me decide to go out and create it. And so, when I met Jason, it, restored my faith of like people are seeing the same things. They understand that this needs to exist. And so, he and I struck up a friendship and, really just stayed in touch for the last 3 years as they were, building the business. But, I think it is an important one of like, for us in this example, the phone was a lot of people were going away from it. And so being able to bring that back, has made it more effective all of a sudden. It just seems new and unique, especially when, email is proliferated with a lot of like AI written copy. Being able to have a human to human connection resonates there.
Yeah, John, you've had a long, successful career, in sales leadership, and undoubtedly you've evaluated and bought a lot of sales solutions.
Yeah.
Now, how has switching to selling like a sales tool changed like the way you evaluate?
Yeah. Look, I think everybody there, and right now it's gotten more complicated, Ding. Like I think, it is so hard to, one, compete for budget and attention, because I think everybody's like looking to decrease their spend, right? So I think the dollars are less, fluid than they've ever been. I think the willingness to bring a new tool in, like I think everybody bought tools, for the last 5 years. And I think now people are like, okay, can we get by with less tools, right?
Yeah.
And so, you're fighting through a lot of that, kind of natural gravity and noise there. And so I think it really puts a lot of pressure on like, how do you demonstrate value really quickly? Yeah. And so I think like the tools that I think, really stand out are the ones that are like, hey, we can get you up and running and get you into a trial and like get you to value before you've even put, your ink to paper here, and, that's important. I think like you have to be able to show impact. You have to really be able to show that there's like a, easy path to get there.
Yeah. Like the speed of win kind of.
Totally. Yeah. The ones that are, having to sell like in a year from now, once we get this implemented, you're going to be better off. Like I think the person you're talking to may not be in that job in a year, and they're thinking that. They're not saying it, but they're probably thinking it. And so, I think the way that you can, get around that is be able to have a product that really solves their immediate pains right there.
Yeah. I've always been a fan of Orum too. I think it's, what's the saying is, now people don't buy tools, they invest in outcomes.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, as part of that investment into, anything with the phone it's really also them committing to like, hey, we're going to invest in this channel and invest in a partner that can help us unlock this channel and get more results out of it. It's not just we're buying this tool. Yeah. Right. I think it's a different psychological shift as well.
Totally. Yeah, no, you're hitting the nail on the head too. And I think like, we have to realize that we're not a fit for everybody. Like some companies may not value the phone, and that's okay. Like our job's not to convince them that the phone is important to them, right? And so like in a good example, this is like PLG companies that I've worked with a ton of, right? They, traditionally don't have SDR teams. They believe that the product is where they, get that first entry point, and they take it from there. And so, we've had a lot of engagements with some of them, and some of them have said, hey, we've maxed out all of our PLG, magic, and now we need to think about new ways. And like, that's a perfect time for us to come in. But the ones that maybe are early in that journey, like we're not going to be able to change their mind, and that's probably not the right use of our time. So go find the folks that, really understand and value that channel and, want to invest in that channel. Right.
100%. I think the phone, I mean, I'm biased. The Sales Rapper, my biggest song's called Hitting the Phone. So I'd be remiss if I wasn't a big proponent of that channel. I think the thing with PLG that's funny is, especially during ZIRP era, like we saw a lot of companies pushing the PLG umbrella, but they didn't really have the traffic and the demand to, so, it's a lot of these pure outbound companies claiming almost said PSG, shout out the soccer team, PLG, you know, for clout purposes, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, we have some kind of, but then you actually have any conversations, and it's hard to book calls. There's not that much intent. There's little appetite for upsells, you know. So
Yeah.
Things been dying to start cold calling again.
Yeah.
yeah,
You've been dying to. It's cool because I mean, like, it's just because you're even going with AI, like emailing.
Yep.
It's just been insane. Anyone can just spin up an email cadence and blast away. So I really think there's like almost like a pivot back to the phone, which I think is really interesting. And yeah, people, I think, and everyone kind of receives information differently. Maybe I'll get on a sales call because of email, but there are a lot of people out there that rather just talk to someone.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, I often get another question similar to yours earlier. Like, what is your favorite channel, you know, for, you know, acquiring new customers? And I'm like, all of them, like, because you have to do all of them, right? Again, to your point there, Jake, like, you know, some will respond to emails, some won't, right? You know, some will, you know, respond to multi-touch, you know, some will respond to LinkedIn, you know, and so like, you know, unless you know that, you have to try all of them, right?
Totally.
You know, and I think especially, you know, when you saw everybody pivot away from one altogether, you know, it just puts so much dependence on that like, you know, it is fun to see something old be new again, you know, and it's actually become, you know, very much that case. Like everybody we've been signing on recently is like, we're seeing 3-to-1, 4-to-1, you know, kind of response over email, you know, just introducing phone again. And so like, not to say that phone is the end all be all, like I'm not going to tell you that, but I think that's why diversification in your mix and like regular discipline around using the diversification and all those touch points together in a meaningful way is like what wins. I think.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm in market for a tool and like, it's just easier for me to, instead of responding to your email, if I have brain awareness of this product, I know this solution exists.
Yeah.
And someone's calling me about it, like, sure, let's just talk real quick.
Yeah.
Like it's, you know, there's just right timing. That's the main thing.
Totally.
And it's like, you know, you zoom out, look at the whole buyer's journey. I think you're coming from pure sales and now touching more marketing, understanding the whole go-to-market picture. A lot of times the phone touch, even if it's not directly resulting in a sales next step, it's a great marketing touch point, right? And I think that's the misconception a lot of people have with the phone is that, oh, if you're not booking calls, there's zero value at all. That's not necessarily the case. Even with email, right? Sometimes it's just a marketing touch.
Yeah. It takes, I mean, as they always have said forever, and it hasn't changed, I don't think, it takes 7 touches usually to get somebody, you know, into an engagement. And I think like mixing those up, right? I think it doesn't mean hit them with 7 phone calls back to back, right? It's like all those things need to work together. I do love to like calling has gotten more complicated and it continues to get more complicated. And so you have like iOS screeners now, you know, which has been interesting to see. You know, a lot of people, again, shy away from the screeners. It's like, if I hit a screener, I'm just going to abandon. And it's like, no, like that's a touch point, you know, and I, you know, we have a great, you know, solution for iOS screeners. So I recently turned it on and, you know, you get to see, you know, this is, you know, John calling, you know, for XYZ kind of thing. And it's like, okay, you know, there's a good chance that I might say like, I'm in market for that, or I'm feeling that pain. So let me take this call right now. Or maybe not now, I'm in a meeting, but like, okay, you know, or I'm just reached out. That's, you know, registering in my head as one of those touch points. So it can become one of those touch points. It's not necessarily a blocker, but I think a lot of people still see it as like, I didn't get the conversation. It's like, but it's still a touch point, you know, use it as that.
Yeah, I think you've hit on something that very early in my sales career, and when I talk to a lot of folks who are a little more green, is this misconception that senior folks don't take cold calls.
Yeah.
Right. And I think one thing I've learned over the years as I've gotten more experience is the higher you go, the more likely that you are to take a cold call, because you're always looking for ways to improve your team's performance, always looking for ways to innovate.
Yeah. I think we're all, you know, kind of hardwired that way too. And I think if you've been doing this for long enough, like you look at others, like, I mean, I can't tell you like how many times I go into a restaurant and I evaluate like their operations and like, you know, those different experiences. Like you either do it, you know, knowingly, or sometimes it's just happening in the back of your mind. Right. But I think like it is a good opportunity. And I think, you know, it is good for you to test that and, you know, see what others are doing. And so, yeah, I do pick it up. I do register those touch points. I think voicemails is another one too. I think a lot of folks abandon on voicemails, and, you know, now with the transcription services, you know, I may not listen to it, but I can read it, you know, and again, there's that other touch point. So it goes against that 7, you know, and hopefully gets you closer to that person picking up or engaging on that next email there.
What has gotten your attention recently? from a sales outbound perspective? Is there anything that's any recent memory or things that what actually works and gets your attention these days?
Yeah, look, I do think a lot of the stuff you guys are doing, I do have this like, kind of running rant in my head that, our brains have now been so programmed to like react to AI written copy, so like I can scan my inbox. I'm sure you all do this too, where it's like I can see all of this, email and it's coming in and now much more, volume. And you can tell it wasn't written for me, right? It wasn't like at all, generated with me in mind. It was sent to probably 100 people plus me, right? And so like my eye actually triggers on like brevity and more precision, and so I would say like slowing down and taking the time there. But I think back to you all too, like things that you can do that are more human and stand out, like things through social. I think that people are really craving and looking for that. Just looking for things that are different, right? I think that's the thing that, our brains are great at spotting patterns, and that can be a good and a bad thing. And I think the patterns right now are causing us to be so inundated that if you do just do something outside of the norm, like you actually can get through the noise much quicker there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one trend I've been seeing a lot of with in-person, right, events, and it's funny because post-COVID we were like, oh yeah, it's coming back, and then AI came, and it actually, I think it's big. In-person's bigger, more important than ever. Orum has a very good programming with that. Had the pleasure of attending the dive bar
Thank you
tour
for coming out.
Yeah. And y'all are doing great dinners, and exhibiting, at some different events. But tell us more about like how you think about event strategy as it relates to growth.
It's similar to that answer, and I think that's exactly it. As we all are, kind of looking for moments of connection. I think that's really the lens that we're using on this, and I think like. In person is back, and I do think like I get so much value out of like in real life and meeting with other operators, and especially like right now with like all of us are grappling with different problems and things that we're trying to solve, and so just being able to step out of your day to day and talk to another operator and being like, how are you solving this? Are you seeing the same thing? Like there's something to be said about that, and so. That really has been, our thoughts on it is like trying not to do the traditional kind of boring networking events here. And so to your point, we did two, we're doing city by city takeovers. We just did one in Austin, but, we did one that was executive focused, and it was really capped at like no more than 30 people. So meant to be small and intimate. And it was, a great room of great operators. And, it was a panel style just to get the conversation going. But it was like, what's working right now in AI, what really isn't working, and getting people to talk about like different tools, different tactics, things that they're seeing. And, I got so much great feedback out of that of like, man, that was really refreshing because I thought I was unique and that I was dealing with this one problem and I kept, kind of falling into this trap. And, just being able to talk to other people was so, powerful there. And so I think that plus, we did a second night, that was more geared towards our, end user, but it was meant to be just more about having fun and like getting people together, networking in a place that wouldn't be normal. And so we're calling it our dive bar tour that we're trying out. And so we picked, a great dive bar here in Austin, and, we had live music there too, which is again, like probably doesn't fit the norms there, because it's, it's more akin to a party that you would have with your friends or going out with your friends, but that's really what we want to establish. And then, through that, hopefully there'll be lots of fostering of connection, people, getting to share, conversations and hopefully connect afterwards there. And so I think that's where we're gearing is like, how do we flex up on, human moments? I actually, coming off of that week, it was a great week, but it was, a lot of energy spent, time with teams and customers and prospects. And Saturday I was at a get together with a CMO who had just gotten back from a big conference. And she said something that actually like kind of really resonated, as the antithesis to this, but she was like, I just went to this big conference. It was 4 days. I'm exhausted. And she was like, and it was just too scripted, too perfect. And she was like, and it felt like AI slop in the flesh.
Oh no.
And I was like, oh my God. And again, it just speaks to, the feeling that we all have right now. Like our brain is now trained to look for things that don't feel human, and then I guess that event just missed the mark in her eyes, and that it didn't, provide that like moments of connection and like, freeness of conversation to be able to like, talk. It was just more about like, well, let's sit through, 5 sessions of PowerPoint here and, you'll have a happy hour at the end and that'll be the day, that just didn't land. So I think we're trying to be different here in that case. And I think that's, what some of the better brands are doing, or just trying to take a look at those things and really put a lens of like, it's got to add value for someone to come spend, a Thursday night with you, and so, recognize that and make sure you're giving them value, to, hopefully capture their time there.
You know what I love about this breakdown is the through line with everything you just said. How can we add value to the end user? How can we add value to the community? How can we connect people? It's all about helping others, not how can we maximize our ROI from it, right? And I think that's really been the killer of some of these events, where it feels like their consultant that is doing AI prompts of how can we maximize and get our messaging everywhere, just like every single touch point in minute on site at the event is trying to sell you something. And that's the complete opposite of everything that I've experienced with Orum and the events that you're doing, the team.
I appreciate it. I've got a good team, and I'd say like it is fun. And I think that, speaking to a number of customers, I think a lot of them are just like, I feel like every time, in the bad cases, it's like, I feel like we're being sold to every moment. Right. And I think like, we obviously exist, to, grow brand awareness and sell more product. And so, that has to be in the back of our minds here, but it can't be, like the leading, reason you're getting people to spend time with you, or else it just won't, make
it's like commission breath from the event planner.
Yes. It's like a timeshare pitch, it's like you sit through this session, we'll give you something good at the end here,
And chat's not coming up with, severance parties or dive bar, so it's fun. It's fun. What so you mentioned you rolled out Claude to the whole team. Maybe tell us a little bit about that, because we're doing something similar over here.
Oh, really? Okay. And it's funny, I've heard other people have done this, and this was a unique experience. Wasn't, like it maybe in some ways was a little bit of a fail. And I think, we have to all be like trying new things and acknowledging when they don't land, but also acknowledging when they work well. And I would say, we rolled out Claude to the entire Orum population in the last month. And, it has been great. I would say like, there's been some positives in that, like the amount of content that we've been able to create, like the amount of like one of my, sales leaders, has been doing great enablement and training and has built all these, kind of modules. And he, took all that and threw it into Claude, and even, using the brand standards and guidelines, he was able to create field guides out of all the stuff he'd created. So like creating micro ways to, kind of disseminate that content, in different ways. And so super powerful, in a lot of ways, like building, customer presentations. We use Glean and now Claude with that. And like, our AEs can actually, get their decks, ready in 5 minutes before, the call.
Nice.
And they look great. And that's been, awesome to see. And I think that part's been cool. Like, the problem with like just throwing it out in the wild and seeing what happens and not putting parameters around it. We did have actually like in the first week, like one seller like burn through all of his credits in a week, and, we had to like what happened there? Okay, let's unpack this here, and it was interesting. The seller, was trialing a bunch of new things, spent a whole week just going deep on this, and some of the things he was doing, I was like, okay, like we have a tool for that, and he's like, well, by vibe coding it, I basically saved 2 clicks kind of thing. And I'm like, all right, well, that's probably not the real reason to do this and burn our credits here. And I thought about that week that he spent becoming the foremost expert on this and automating everything in his workflow. I'm like, is this taking him away from those human touch points? Is this taking him away from his like natural talents, possibly? And so like, I can't have him do this every week. And so, we've had some of those learnings, and then inversely on the back of this, we got together as a leadership team, and like the engineering and product teams did the same thing. And, they burned through their credits. And I think there's this whole talk track of like, if your engineering and product team isn't, using all their credits, then what are they doing? And I think that's a little bit of an interesting one to unpack too. But the product leader was beating the desk almost at the time and said, like, I think everybody should be using all their credits. And I was like, I think for you all, that's okay. I think for the sales team, I'd probably like to see us use it in the right, meaningful ways and not just go burn credits to burn credits, right? Like, let's make sure that we're, making our sales process better. Let's make sure that we're, providing, the right, things to our teams here, but like, let's not make this the overall consuming thing we do here.
I think you alluded to something specifically on the sales side, because, technical teams, that is the conjecture right now, is like token maxing, which is funny because this week I think someone from Amazon and then someone else at Uber, right now, they're walking it back.
Are they?
They're like, oh, maybe we shouldn't be burning through our credits. And you even have Anthropic and OpenAI, both coming out this week and saying like, oh, the SaaS apocalypse, might not be, or AI replacing everyone's jobs might actually not happen the same way on the same time scale that they were promising 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I think part of that too, is like we're in a period right now of token subsidized.
Yeah.
I can't speak
Token
right now.
subsidization.
Yep.
I can't even say it.
Subsidization,
Yeah.
right? Subsidies. And that's where if we're hitting the rate limits right now, right, and this is on the cheapest possible it's ever going to get.
Yeah.
Right. Once they're like, hey, we need to make some money and
Yeah.
and get our margins up. Then people are going to be left holding the bag, right?
Yep.
But I think the key point that I got from where you're just talking about was there's an opportunity cost beyond the tokens, beyond hitting your rates. It's as people are doing super deep dives, right? To your point of where is their natural talent at?
Yeah.
Where's their biggest impact potential at the company? And anytime they're spending getting better AI, opportunity cost, they're not getting better at sales, doing human touches, understanding the market, the personas, etc. Right. So and I think that's something where it is a good thing to call out, because on engineering, like, that is the job. Just you're shipping code,
Production. Yeah.
right? That's it.
Yeah. Getting stuff out the door, shipping. Yeah.
And it's tough because sales, there is a lot of soft skills involved, and I think I've been pounding away at the Mac Mini, building my agents, and even doing that, I'm like, am I losing the touch a little bit?
Yeah. It'll be fun to see where this goes. I do like that you called out token subsidization. I got it. All right. Nailed it. All right. Because I think you're absolutely right. Like, again, we are not paying the full cost right now, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, like, the token maxing mindset, is going to come, at a cost, eventually here. And so, figuring out that right balance to be structured and how to bring it into the right workflow. I do think, again, I've heard this story of what we did with Claude, 3 or 4 times in the last month. So I think a lot of folks are just throwing tools out in the wild, and that's kind of what you have to do, because I think we don't know what's possible until we put it out there in some cases with these tools. And so it's a good test of what is possible. But I think there is going to be a point of, like, where do we govern it a little bit, and not let, look, sometimes sellers can be lazy. I resemble that remark at times, and so I think, like, the goal shouldn't be to save 2 clicks, on entering something into Salesforce, right? It should be about taking, tasks off their plate that really do have a cost to them, that take them away from what they're doing. That it is their superpowers and talents, and making sure that you maintain that balance. And another kind of thematic comment I heard on this was, like, my RevOps team just got back from a conference, and one of the themes that he heard at this RevOps conference was that RevOps should own a lot of this, and I think eventually that's where it probably needs to come back to. You shouldn't be throwing all your tools out into the wild, and the theme was that, RevOps teams should actually work more like a product team. And I was like, that actually resonates right now where we are. We're hearing a lot more now around people, building versus buying again. Tool consolidation is going on, optimization of stack is going on. And so, probably not leaving that at the seller's discretion, is the right way to think about it. Like, some degrees of freedom is great, but I think ultimately, you got to give some, this power back to RevOps to say, like, let's, let us build the agents so everybody has that superpower, not just Ding, let's free Ding up, to do the things he does well here.
Yeah. I think there's a good heuristic I've heard is that with any new AI adoption or new use cases, it's better to look for stuff that historically was too manual to do, or wasn't being done, and now AI has a new way to do it without a human in the loop. And it's a new possibility, whereas a lot of people are over-indexing on how can we save time, how can we reduce 2 clicks, right? And it's like that stuff is, I think, has a more negligible impact, or your total, the ceiling of the impact you can create is a lot lower than so. Like, an example from our world, our company's called Event Shark. A lot of our capture and projects happen at events. Historically, it wasn't worthwhile for me to do any cold outbound, manually scraping a bunch of sponsors off of pages pre-AI.
Yeah.
Right. now it's sourcing the companies, the exhibitors. It's sourcing all of the contacts and the contact info from these exhibitors, and it's presenting it to me in a clean. And I can just do sales.
Yeah.
Right. Run through that list.
Yeah. Yeah. Super powerful. And I think that's, we need to think about that. And there's still some retraining of bad habits too, of like, okay, is it my time again best used in, doing this, or could I, offload some of this stuff there? I think someone said something really great to me that helped me make that mindset shift, but he was like, all of this is like having a PhD level intern, and, those words mattered to me because it's like, look, it's super smart. It is, not your average intern. It's sometimes more, more intelligent on some of the things that, we don't know, but it still needs direction, right? It's an intern, right? And so I think being able to think about that and be able to offload those things that have, traditionally been like a bottleneck for you are not your superpower.
Yeah. I love the piece too about, having product and engineering teams, technical users or builders be more involved on the process and helping go to market. I think Ramp has been doing a very good job of this, right? Where they have a whole separate internal business unit, or Ramp Labs, where they're just doing, internal, and that's touching all different departments, which I'm a big fan of.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I got to bring us home, I got some rapid fire for you.
Okay.
And then Ding, I want you to end us with maybe a little freestyle.
Okay.
But I got a couple rapid fire questions for you. So keep it short.
Yep. I'll do my
best cold call opener.
Man, look, I'm still just a big fan of like being clear and transparent on that, right? So I think like, opening up, really quickly and cutting to the point. So I would say like for me, it is like, this is John from Orum, mind if I get some of your time, the purpose of my call, like I actually like to just net that out really quickly. Because again, you have like that short window to capture their attention. But I think if you do that, those things and practice brevity, usually it lands, more effectively and disarms the situation quickly.
Worst sales advice being repeated still.
Oh man, I hate the whole like sales leaders who like tell their sales teams to like spend more money than they make. Like I actually like I've always like preached financial responsibility, and so I think like I see so many young sellers get into this game, and do not practice good financial literacy, and so I think I hate the the leaders that are like go spend limitlessly, your talents will figure it out. Like that's a bad equation.
What's the thing on X that went viral recently? It's like go buy a Rolex, go into debt if you have to.
Yeah. That's the one that makes me cringe, and I hear it too often still.
Yeah, it's tough too. I think in sales, like just operating from a place of scarcity, right?
Yeah.
And being worried about that stuff, like it kills your potential.
Yeah. You can still you can have a great life in sales, and you can do a lot of things that you didn't think were possible, but also do it and buy houses and put the money into things that return.
Biggest red flag for a new sales hire in the hiring process?
Man, I think, one, not being able to admit when they don't know something, not being able to ask for help. Like, I think those are two things that I look for. Like, I really want to make sure you're curious and someone who is like always, showing a good level of humility and coachability. And so I think those two things.
Most underrated sales methodology right now? Methodology.
I got that one.
You ask the question.
All right. What's the best sales methodology right now?
God, I'm going to take a knee on this one in some ways, or it'll feel like that. I'm a big proponent of picking one and using it regularly. Look, they're all very similar, and so I think like the biggest problem I have is when you have like three different ones being practiced at an organization. Yeah. So I'd say like again, pick one and and make sure that it's practiced regularly and it becomes like your operating, language and rhythm there.
Yeah. I mean, we even say with like content, social platforms, just pick one and be really good at it as a starting point.
I've got a few that I've picked, more recently, but I'd say like, again, it does, matter what kind of product you are, what is the sales motion, is it more transactional? Is it more consultative? Right. But I think like, pick one and follow it regularly and commit.
Most important thing you're doing as a CRO right now?
Talking to people. And I think that's a big one. I think actually, right now, like everybody's, gritting their teeth and like going through some of the tougher quarters they've seen. And I think like, don't go inward and like, try to solve the problem all on your own, like talk to others. And so I think for me, I really make a conscious effort to meet with other, kind of leaders out there just to see like what are they seeing, what are they dealing with, how are they managing through it. It's just so helpful. So more people could do that. Like I think it would really make you more agile and adaptable here.
Most important metric you're looking at right now?
Pipeline. If I had one, it's pipeline, and I often get asked to pick one, but yes, pipeline, and I can cut it a lot of different ways. But I think just picking one, that's it.
What's the best piece of advice you ever got, John?
Yeah, like I think one of the bigger ones that I've kind of like incorporated. There's a book called The Four Agreements. Not a business book. It's actually more in the self-help category or spirituality. But I think like they have 4 easy to follow, kind of like rules. And one that always, kind of comes into it is, assume good intent. And I think like right now with a distributed world, the way that we're communicating, everything gets lost in communication. Like communication is so challenged right now. And so like, I always really fall back to like assume good intent or at least start from there. And, I think it does help like, break through some potential conflict before it becomes conflict. It helps diffuse situations. And so I think that's, one of the 4. I highly recommend that book as well. But I think that's one that I'm, feel like I'm heeding a lot and using a lot right now.
Great book.
You've read it? You read it, Dylan?
Yeah, I read it right the day I restarted the no cookie cutters idea.
Oh, no
Nice.
shit.
No kidding. Yeah, no, I did actually. If I had to pick, I read a bunch of books, and I feel like everybody always asks, like, "What is your favorite book?" And and that one's on there. And I do brush it off on and dust it off and look at it from time to time, just because it's a good reminder on those those 4. Yeah.
Cool. Well, John, I want to prove to you that this is improvised live on the spot. So I want you to give me 5 words right now, and I'll include them in the rap.
Okay, 5 words. Sales related. What do we?
Yeah, go Orum, CRO,
Yeah. Dialing.
What about like a roadshow? Orum Roadshow or something?
Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah,
City
yeah,
takeover? What
yeah.
is it?
Yeah. City by city takeover here.
Yeah,
Or I'm on the road.
Orum on the road.
So this is the OGB. If I can't, this might be a little too fast. I slow it down. What comes around never goes around. Yeah, but we on the phones and we hold it down. You know how it's gonna sound. Yeah, they talking online over the forums. We keeping them hype. We're never boring. We close a deal, go to P Club, drive a foreign. What tool did I just buy? Yo, it was Orum. Yo, let's go. Get with the flow. Who am I here with a CRO? You already know when I explode, I go on LinkedIn. It's a nice show. Yeah, and I'm smiling. We outside freestyling. We wilding. What am I doing right now? I'm dialing. Yeah, better approach me with caution. And it's so damn awesome. Went to school in Boston. Now I just moved out here, Lake Austin. Yeah, we on the boat like Lonely Island. Yeah, but on this turf, I'm a giant and I'm trying. It's quite fine. Go to an event and sip some white wine. We building up the pipeline at the right time. It's getting litty. Are you really ready? It's gritty. We going city by city. Let's get it.
Oh man. All right. That was amazing.
Wow.
Beautiful.
I felt like I hyped you up in my head, and I was like, oh, he's gonna whiff, and you stepped into
No
that
pressure.
moment and owned it, man. I love it there.
Yeah.
Oh.
You know what's funny is I was not always a good freestyler. So I rapped for about 10 years before I got into sales. And then when I first started cold calling, I was terrified of it. Really bad. I had phone resistance and all that. Eventually I got the reps in. I'm like, okay, I got over myself.
Yeah.
Right. I stopped caring. And then magically I learned a freestyle within 6 months after that.
Huh.
And I think there was a very strong correlation of me getting cold call experience and that unlocking that
Yeah.
the ability to take on the fear of the unknown. Oh, I might fail, I might whiff.
Yeah.
But I still got to do it.
Yeah.
Right. And then
It's
the
gonna be
more
okay.
practice you get, the better
Yeah.
the better your skills are.
That's amazing. You don't write the lyrics down, right? You're just doing it in your head.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I admire that skill, and I don't even know how you develop that over time, man.
Sweet. Well, that's a wrap on the
Awesome.
episode. John, thanks for coming by. Go check
Appreciate
out
it,
John on
guys.
LinkedIn. Go check out John on LinkedIn. Go check out Orum. Tune in, subscribe. Check us out on, if you made it this far, you know what to do. Like, comment, subscribe. Peace out.